show up or your voice will appear on the recording. People who watch it later can kind of understand why the answer being given is the answer being given.
And please, by all means, if you have a comment or a suggestion, go ahead and do it, because I'm hoping to learn some of this from you guys, because one of the reasons I'm speaking about this is an area that I'm having problems with right now. In the project I'm currently working on, we have a lot of project-oriented people in management, and we have a lot of agile people in design, and the philosophies are not working well together. Now, they can work well together, but at the moment they're not. So I'm presenting some ideas I've gotten, and if you have others or if something doesn't seem right to you, please by all means speak up, and let's make this a discussion rather than a presentation, if you would. On to the next. Okay, this is the basic stages of project management. Do we have any PMPs in the room? A few? And okay, other people are probably familiar with the basics of project management. This is from the PMBOK, the Project Management Body of Knowledge, the main phases of project management: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. And I've got that set that way for a reason which will become plain in a minute. And the next one, please. It looks an awful lot like waterfall development in software. You know, set up your requirements, design, implement, verify, and then go to maintenance, which is basically the close of the project as far as development is concerned. Okay, go on, please. Okay, a few years ago, we started doing Agile. Am I blocking you there? I'm trying to figure out where I can stand and not block somebody or the screen. Okay, the Agile Manifesto saying we have come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software product over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. You can see where there might be an issue here. Most quality people start to go a little ballistic when you start throwing rocks at documentation. I have a tendency to myself. So they're saying while there is value on the items on the right, they value the items on the left more. The problem is they tend to forget that there is value on the items on the right. One more. Highest priority is satisfy the customer. I hope nobody here has an argument with that. But then through early and continuous delivery of valuable software product. In other words, what Agile is doing, we're not going to hand the guy a package at the end of the product and say, here's your product, thank you very much, and go on. We're going to give him bits and pieces as we go along. And there's some good to that. Welcoming changing requirements even late in development. What's the average project manager call changing requirements? Scope creep. So it's the opposite of welcoming. Deliver working software product frequently from a couple of weeks to a couple of months with a preference for the shorter time scale. This makes it real tough to set up a Gantt chart. With a bunch of dependencies, and this follows this, and this follows this, and so on. So there's a struggle there. There's a dichotomy, if you will. Okay, the next slide, please. Business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. Raise your hand if this happens in your workplace. Really? Okay, good.
Well, once in a while.
Once in a while? As a routine thing, not so much, you know. Build projects around motivated individuals. Give them the environment and the support they need and trust them to get the job done. I love that one. That's a Marine Corps statement right there. The Marine Corps says everybody, down to the lowest private, has to know the mission. And if everybody gets wiped out except the PFC and a private, the PFC takes charge of the private and goes and accomplishes the mission because he knows what it is. So I've seen that work. The most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. Probably true. But inside the development team is not the only place you need to communicate. You need to communicate with the business people, with other stakeholders, and you need to communicate with future users of the software. Working software product is the primary measure of progress. I will agree to that. Working product delivered to the customer is, you know, Crosby says that. The goal, you know, working product delivered is what we're doing. So I'll go along with that. Sustainable development should be able to maintain a constant pace. I've never seen any place, including Agile, that doesn't have surges. You know? And some of that is lack of planning. Some of it's the clash. If we have a target for our award fee coming up, and we got to meet that award fee target, that's going to be number one priority, hell or high water, regardless, you know, because now we're talking dollars, even if it slows down delivery of actual product. And that's poor design of the contract and the agreement with you and your customer, to my mind. Attention to technical excellence and good design. Sure, you know, if you find a problem, fix it and change the design. Simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done. Again, it's hard to argue with, but you got to plan for it. Best architectures, requirements, designs emerge from self-organizing teams. How much self-organizing teams do people work with here? Have you dealt with money? No. No. I think it's true, but in a modern large corporation, it's hard to get a self-organizing team, except by accident, unless you're very careful with who you hire, and you go through and get a very good corporate culture that says, if you're on a team, it organizes itself. That's the way we do things. I haven't seen much of that happen. I saw it in the American Red Cross a few years ago. But you're talking about a bunch of people who are working in a volunteer organization with a super mission, who are in things like nursing that aren't horribly well-paid professions to begin with. So they're there for the mission. And then you can get a good self-organizing team. And sometimes that's what we've got to do, is what the heck is the mission? Robert Townsend in Up the Organization had his definition of it in his chapter on excellence. And he said that whatever you do should be excellent, because if it's not excellent, it will be neither fun nor profitable. And if you're not here for fun or profit, what the hell are you doing here? So, and that was his entire statement on quality. That's all he had to say on the issue. Okay, at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. Corrective action, management review, things like that. You know, this should be all stuff that we're used to. And one more. Okay, how work gets done. There's basically 3 different ways things get done. You got plan-driven, where we deliver results at the end. This is the typical software development life cycle, the waterfall, PERT, critical chain, print. Some of these, you've all probably heard some of these. And the typical large project, building a bridge. It's pretty much, it isn't done till it's done. Okay, you have Agile with planning. Now, Agile, we'll get into the details on these a little later, but planning and execution doesn't occur in one continuous flow. It occurs in bits and pieces. You will plan a Scrum, typically between 2 weeks to a month, and you'll have goals for that Scrum that is a subset of your overall project goals. And then each day, you'll look at what am I going to accomplish today? What is the team going to accomplish today? And then you cycle that in the next day. What did I get done? What did I not get done? When the Scrum is finished, you look at what did we get done? What didn't we get done? Go back to what the overall project requirements are and plan the next Scrum based on what's still left to do and who you've got. So it's a continuous moving target. And then there's Agile without planning. We have a little bit of that going on in ours, and that's typically like Kanban. You set up a bunch of tasks, you put them on a board. You can do this electronically. And basically, when somebody gets finished with one thing, they take the next thing they're qualified to do in terms of priority and go do it. Okay. So this is really a spectrum. At the top, you've got certainty, it's predictive, you know what's going to happen. Next week, we're going to do this. 6 months from now, we're going to be doing this. If uncertainty is high, if you've got changing requirements, does anybody not have changing requirements? Anybody have a customer that doesn't change the requirements on you? Okay. When requirements change, this tends to not do quite as well. Adaptive processes like Scrum and extreme programming allow for a certain amount of change and planning. In fact, it requires detailed planning. However, it's on a shorter range. And reactive processes such as Kanban, and that's the only example I could find of a completely reactive process, basically doesn't really require planning. You can pull Kanban cards out and put new ones in, and that's the extent of your planning. And have you make sure that the project owner agrees with the order those cards are set up. And that's about the planning you do. So this is the kind of planning that goes on in Scrum. You have initial planning where your customer says, I need this. A lot of times it's done with what they call user stories. It says, I want to use this tool to do this to accomplish that. And that's a user story. And then you go in and you figure out, what do we have to build in order for our customer to be able to do that? Initial planning looks at the user story and says, here's what we've got to do. Then planning, we take those requirements, we fill in with things like Derivative requirements, well, if you've got to have an interface. The interface has got to be able to, we've got blind people, we've got to have a voice interface, and we've got to have a no voice interface for the deaf people, you know, or whatever subsidiary requirements you come up with. You put those requirements together and you look at them and you say, okay, this requirement is going to take this much time. It's going to take a typical team of 5 people a week to do. So we'll score that as a week. Then there's various point systems that people use and so forth. So if you're working on a Scrum of 30 days, what you do is you put together enough requirements that you believe your team can do this in 30 days. And that's your Scrum plan. That's your Scrum backlog. Then you go into implementation. Some of it gets deployed, some of it, you know, depending on how it's going, you test, evaluation, you might have to cycle around a couple of times till you get working product. But once you have tested working product, off it goes and it gets deployed to the customer. Since this is Deming's section, I thought you'd appreciate that there's a certain similarity there to Deming's Plan, Do, Check, Act. That was just, okay. So Scrum, like many things, started in Japan looking at really manufacturing. They called it the rugby approach, which is, I guess, where the word Scrum came from. But they wanted one cross-functional team, which is where that self-organizing teams had to come in. Because in Scrum, you can't have, you know, this group of developers and this group of developers by skills in different silos. Because when you're working on a requirement, you're probably going to need a cross-section of skills. So the team needs to have a cross-section. So this is a little history. It's been around for a while, since 80s and 90s. Let's go on. Now we talked about requirements management. That's just some of the types of requirements you can end up trying to deal with. You know, a lot of time, you know, non-functional requirements, legal requirements, you know. The government says you have to do this, whether it means anything to your project or not, this sort of thing. Anybody else? Did I miss any major ones? Anybody you can think of? Just curious. Go on. So again, this is the Scrum process as a whole. You have the product backlog. These are the requirements we have gotten from our customer. And it's a long list. So the product owner, aka the customer's representative, is going to tell us what features, what things, what capabilities are most important to him. What does he need first? Those go in the product backlog at the top. So we pull enough out of that product backlog to create the sprint backlog. This is the things we think we can get done in one sprint. Sometimes 30 days. NSA uses a 90-day sprint, which is the longest I've ever heard of. But different places you do different lengths of sprint. So during the 30 days, typically you say, you freeze those requirements. I'm not going to change what's in the sprint for 30 days. You get that much freeze. If it's critical, you start over. You just stop the whole sprint and start over. So if something is critical enough to the customer, it's some kind of major safety issue that's arisen or something, you might have to stop it. But normally you don't change requirements and rearrange processes inside that 30 days. The team meets usually very briefly, usually every morning. Everybody comes in, gets their cup of coffee, meets in the team lead's office, and everybody says, this is what I did yesterday. This is what I didn't get done yesterday. I said I was going to get done. This is why. This is what I think's in my way, and this is what I think I'm going to do today. The team lead looks at, are we on track? Looks at the things that are in the team's way, because it's the team lead's job to go out and get those things out of the way. And looks at, are people doing today, or planning to do today, what they should be planning to do today? And once that's over, and it shouldn't take more than about 10 minutes, 15 or so, at the most, everybody goes off and does their work. And when they need to collaborate, they just do. And you come back the next day. At the end of the sprint, hopefully, you've got a list of requirements, a list of abilities that are now deliverable to the customer. The software will now do X that you wanted it to do. One more. Again, there's user stories. I want to use this to do this because. And that's how we create feature list, requirements list, whatever you want to call it. But what features does the customer want? And a lot of times they will come back and say, you know, that doesn't work worth a darn when we get it out into the world. So the next sprint, you're doing something different, which is the great advantage to Agile, is you don't end up, we were talking about never use the first release of any piece of software earlier before the meeting. Never use release 1. Never buy, you know. Well, there is no release 1, really, with Agile, because it's been released in chunks over the course of time, and by the time you get to the end, some of the more basic stuff, which is usually where you start, the actual architecture, has been in use for the whole project. It's being used and being run. So it's not release 1 anymore. So hopefully, this is where Agile shines. Where it doesn't shine is things like, how do I, as a project manager, tell corporate what percentage are we done? You know, how do I justify to the government or the customers' people why I deserve 100% award fee? Because a lot of the typical benchmarks aren't really there. Our current project I'm working on, major benchmark, is ready for final acceptance testing. Well, we ain't going to have the whole product ready for final acceptance testing for a long time. But we've got bits and pieces of it that have been through it. So it's not a very good marker for us for award fee. And we're trying to renegotiate that now. And I'm not sure how the powers that be are going to negotiate that. We're a firm fixed price contract, and the award fee is kind of important to us. But the way we've designed our system and the way the contract is laid out don't really talk to each other real well. Okay. So again, the PMBOK waterfall, kind of showing that again. And just Agile, same thing really. Initial planning, requirements, sprint requirements, then we go into that whole cycle of develop, improve, control. That was actually pulled out of a Six Sigma file, so it should say develop rather than improve. But and kicks off to delivered product. And it's really the same flow, just broken down differently. There's really not a basic difference, but the problem is measuring it, controlling it, and communicating it become an issue. And that needs to be thought of way back at the beginning when you're dealing with the contract and the agreements and you're starting up working relationships with your customer. How are we going to do this? And if he's thinking waterfall and you're thinking agile, you need to resolve that early. One more. Should be another one. Okay. So I kind of went back through that manifesto for Agile product development. So individuals, we've come to value individuals' interactions over processes and tools. Well and good, but I'm adding the caveat underneath, processes and tools that enable individuals and interactions should be encouraged. So, you know, developers can't just say, the heck with the process, because the process is there to help you, you know? And that's another thing that you have to make sure that your ITIL and other folks understand is we're not here for the process is here for us. Working product over comprehensive documentation. Product doesn't work without documentation. Not once it's left the hands of the people who built it. Customers and future developers have a right to enough documentation to understand the product. That should be considered part of the product by the folks developing. If you don't have enough documentation, you don't have working product. You've got as a kludge that nobody can understand. I actually had a developer at NSA tell me when we found a bug and he was on vacation and we couldn't find any documentation. He says, well, you don't need documentation, you just should have called me on vacation. You know? So just get a hold of me, I'll fix it for you. And sure enough, he did. When he got back, he fixed it for us in about 10 minutes. But we'd waited a week for it because we had no blooming documentation on how the flippin' thing worked. And nobody else could figure it out. And it was a beautiful piece of software. It was helping their mission enormously, but they had analysts who were going nuts because their favorite tool was down and they couldn't get it back up because there was no document. You know, I think some of the higher ups in his organization reasoned with him, but I'm not sure they really convinced him. They have over at NSA what they call the math mafia. These are people that are very, very intelligent, but don't really have much understanding how the rest of us work and do business. Okay, customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Contract negotiation is a form of customer collaboration. So collaboration is easier when you deal with that ahead of time, and everybody understands the basis you're going to work on. So that's, the things. And responding to change over following a plan. Well, my instant response to that is responding to change is easier when you've planned how to do that. I mean, if you don't have some kind of plan on how you're going to respond when things go awry, you've got a pretty sad situation. Or when the world changes. Companies have been known to keep producing the same product for years after it's become obsolete because that's what they knew how to do. They didn't change. I could think of General Motors. Produced large cars for years after everybody started buying small cars in the 70s and 80s. And the Japanese proceeded to eat our lunch. We value the items on the left and we value the items on the right as they contribute to the success of the items on the left. That is how I am restating it. And that's really most of my presentation. I know it's short, guys, but there's a couple more slides, but there's not really a lot on them. Go on. Principles. This is really a repetition of something we've been talking about. But that's where I think it is. It goes back, as so many things do, to communication and prior planning and making sure everybody understands what the ground rules are. This is how we're going to do it. We're going to use Agile. We're going to be under a short time frame. So our targets should be short time frame. How we get rewarded should be based on how we're doing that. You can have a burn down or burn up list that says, we're following the right curve. It looks like we're actually going to get all the requirements done by the end of the schedule, or it doesn't. As you're going through the project, because you know pretty much what they are. And you can also go back and say, customer, look at all these changes you've made. We've had to redo all this stuff, so, a few more shekels is probably deserved, because we've had to do extra work. Now we're getting you a better product because of that, but you should be willing to pay that if you're willing to make us do that work to do the changes. And you've got to have those mechanisms built in. And if you're doing it every 30 days, the typical engineering change proposal process doesn't work for that. You try and get the typical contracting officer to do an ECP every 30 days when there's a new sprint. They're going to throw you out of their office. But if you've planned for that ahead of time, maybe we can do something with it. So that's my take on it. Right after this gentleman. Can you hear me now?
Okay, we'll try that. Bob Orkin. I will base my comment on a database development project that I was involved with. I was effectively the client's representative for it. It was an in-house client and developer, but that's besides the point.
Sure.
What we ran into in the long version was, or the short version, that we ended up with changes happening all the time to a product that was in use, and no notification or documentation of the changes that were happening, and lack of documentation, but also lack of notice to the users of the changes. So I think the developer thought he was doing Agile, but we as the users were running into major problems trying to use the product.
Yeah. Go back a few. I'll tell you when to stop. Right there, right there. Here's where that freeze for the sprint, the product backlog is what the customer can change. He can change the product backlog, and he can change the priorities in the product backlog. So he can say, I don't want that anymore, I want this. And I want B to be first instead of A. Once he's done that, then it's up to you to create your sprint. And basically, that's a design freeze for 30 days. Unless you've got a full-bore emergency, you don't change what you're doing during the sprint. So that gives you a certain amount of stability. You know you're going to get new releases, but you're going to get them on a 30-day cycle. And it's a little more control. But that can be fallen by the wayside if you don't have a good Scrum Master controlling that. He's got to go back to the product owner and say, look, is this an emergency? Do I really need to stop everything and change what we're doing? Because that's costly. And I'm going to expect you to pony up for it.
Well, what they didn't do is they didn't stop anything. They just made the changes.
That's dropping out that whole planning and requirement function there. So, not a good application of sprint principles.
Is it on? Okay. Yeah, this is all right. My experience has been that it's difficult with a government customer to get the commitment to the involvement and decision making around their schedules. I mean, it's tough to get them to say, I recognize this is different than what I've been accustomed to, and I have to be more involved, and I'll commit my time and energy to faster cycles. Has this been your experience?
It is, to a certain extent. The people that you is the COR, the contracting officer's representative, and the COTAR, the technical contracting officer's representative. And those are the folks that have to be in, they need to be living with you for all intents and purposes. And that's sometimes hard to get the government to give them the time they need. They're divided up between several projects and say, no, we need him here, and we need him to basically live here. But that's what, so it's at that level, because then they can go back government to government. And if they're living with you and they see what you're doing and you've shown them the value of it, then government to government, they can advocate for you. So that's the level you got to hit, is the COTAR and the COR, and get them in there on your side, make them part of the team. You'd think we'd be a technical
I know, right?
Organization, but
it's not really like a microphone. I was told a long time ago that when you're working on a Scrum or anything, they don't do a lot of the documentation while they're working. But do they get to it later? Because, you do need that eventually.
I've seen it done both ways. NSA ran those very long scrums. The last 2 weeks, typically, most of the time they spent doing the documentation in there, which is maybe part of the reason they ran them as long as they did. I've also seen it done coterminously at the same time, if that's the right word. I don't think it is. But it has to be done. It isn't delivered product until the customer can use it, and the customer can't use it if he can't understand it. So as a quality person, that's the line I have to take. And I've had to put my foot down, even in my current assignment, and say, no. If you don't have the plan finished for the, I don't care if you've got the test software and everything done. If you don't have the test plan and the test procedure written, it ain't done. You can't deliver it. It's not deliverable yet. So, and that did not endear me to the engineering manager. But fortunately, the program manager backed me up. So, so we were 2 days late in delivering it. But if he'd done his job when he was supposed to, we wouldn't have been late.
Well, Jeff, thank you for coming in and sharing your knowledge
well,
and your experiences on Agile. I think one of the things that rang through without you saying it is that Agile is really in the people business, because it takes the team to deliver, and the team has to understand they need to be nimble, they need to be quick, they have to be flexible, yet they have to hold to some of the principles and purposes that are set up. And it's when the people forget those things that the Scrum Master has to put on the size 14 work boot, steel reinforced.
And if he won't, then guess what, quality people? It then becomes our job to do it, as is so often the case. If nobody else is going to enforce the requirements, guess what? Your job is not to make friends. Your job is to make good product.
Yeah, because that's what's being paid for. Did you have another comment? So, if there are no further questions, we will be assembling at PJ Skidoo's on October 12, and that will be in Fairfax on Highway 29. For those of you who are interested, on the wall we have the most up-to-date version of our draft business plan for 2017. Appreciate it if you put any comments on anything. Everything is 100% correct while it's in draft, but as soon as it goes off for review, you get to be a straw man for the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. So anybody who'd like to put their eyeballs, feel free to make notes on the document itself. We'll update it, but we're going to start sending it through the more formal review process. And we hope to have a very good year 2017 coming up. We are always looking for volunteers. People retire, they move on to other things. One of the things, Paul Mills is going to be leaving us come June of next year. He will be retired. Paul has been doing an admirable job as our education chair. Muzaffar Zafar has volunteered to step up to backfill Paul, and he's going to be leaving the proctor position, so we are looking for somebody who might want to be the proctor. I've spoken with a few people. Otherwise, we are in good shape. We have a new program chair. His name is Jim Pastrick, and Jim has spoken to us before about unexploded the land before you let mere mortals walk upon it. Jim's doing a conference up in New York City, so he's not able to join us, but he will be doing that. The nice thing is because he's the CEO of the company, he can't get tasked by other people unless it's a client, so he has the CEO to CEO handshake for bringing in a different type of speaker than what we've been having currently. So we're looking forward to great things as we go through the remainder of 2016 and 2017. We will be voting on a slate of the elected officers. Next month, we'll present those people to you at the time, and otherwise, we're in good shape to move forward. So thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. Please, Bob.
Just one thing. I'm the database administrator for the group, and any of you who want your recertification points, send me an email at DBA, and I'll send you back a list of your points. There was a question earlier on how to do that, so I just want to make sure everybody knows. Just send me an email, and in a not too short a time, I'll send you.
Does everybody know what to
DBA
do if
16.
you see Jim running quickly off a beach?
Right.
Keep up.
So that, and just to segue on Bob's comments about your recertification units, all of the information on the website is correct for sending your information to our recertification chair, Christine Kowalski. Please do not try an end around and send it directly into headquarters, because it will be sent back to you, and that just puts a delay into your recertification award. So follow the the instructions, and please do not call Christine at work. She's in a area that it's difficult to get to people, and if it's an emergency, yes, but nothing on recertifications is an emergency, and it counts against her in the big scheme of things. And because she does such a wonderful job, I don't want her to walk off because she gets angry at us. Are there any other announcements that need to be made by members of the leadership? Oh, yes, we are. We're going to be looking to backfill the proctor chair. We've just had Ms. Offer step up to be the education chair, and we're going to be looking to have a bona fide candidate for the chair-elect. And other than that, we are pretty much adjourned.